Susan, I was going to wear my black and white stripes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See?
Last time I did that, Rob complained. He said she's trying to dress like me.
I'm trying to dress just like
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back to LoveBabz, LoveTalk. This is the talking part of LoveBabz, LoveTalk because it's my Friday, and y'all know I'm here all day. But anyway, this is 10 o'clock hour. Guess who's in the studio with me today? I've been chasing these women for months. Hey, Monrose. Hey, B. Doja Taylor.
Good morning, Babz.
Welcome to LoveBabz, LoveTalk. Speak right into the mic so I can
Okay,
hear you.
good morning.
How are y'all?
Good, how are you doing?
Yeah, you good?
I think so.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Happy summer.
Happy summer.
Happy summer.
It's moving right along.
It's good. All right, so B. Doja Taylor is the owner of Black Friend Heritage Gallery and a Walking Truth Christian bookstore on the corner of Edgewood and Day, one of my favorite places in the city. It is a gem of this city. And the Monroes, who I've known through my relationship with B. I've known them for years and years and years. And they're sisters.
So they tell us.
Now, they've got this thing called Book Talk Sisters, and they are running this conversation, book club, book group thing around Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro. Why?
Why not?
Why not? Why not?
Yeah. Actually, we started book grouping in Baltimore years ago. We did a group in our home, in our apartment. We just wanted to. I had an idea, a desire, really, to talk to people about citizenship and Black issues and what we're trying to do in this country, uplift all of that. And so we started reading in our apartment. We moved it to our main library downtown in Baltimore, and opened a citywide reading group before reading groups became that popular. And then when we got here to New Haven, we kept in stride. B. Doja Taylor, as you said, has a gem of a bookstore, cultural icon in the city. And so we teamed up, and here we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so is this is not the first conversation, is it? No.
No.
This is really the third. Last year we opened with a discussion of the founding documents.
Yes.
Right. Gloria Brown Marshall has a book, U.S. Constitution, an African American Perspective. And she's annotated the Constitution with notes about historical references to the Black experience. So we did that, and it also includes the Declaration of Independence. And we fed some other documents and articles into it to make it more relevant for today. But that's where we began last year. And in the spring, we repeated that reading, and now we've moved on to the Miseducation of the Negro.
Okay. All right. So what's the response been like? Are people feeling this, or are people feeling like, I don't want to talk about these things? Are people receptive?
Yeah, people are receptive. I wasn't sure how people would feel about the miseducation of the Negro. It's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about a Black reading group. And, well, it really isn't. But frankly, B was reading it. And after our social justice call with the founding document, she kept talking about the Carter G. Woodson, the author, talking about his views on education and how obviously relevant that is today to what we're dealing with. So we said, why not? For the end of the summer, let's just put that on the agenda and see who comes out. And we had our first session last Saturday, and we had a good response. And then we also do a Twitter chat. Sue and I and B have come on board. Yeah, we do a Twitter chat. So just this week, Tuesday evening, we do it from 8 to 9. And one of our tweets got picked up. It virtually went viral. I mean, for our standards, we got about 20 retweets and a lot of likes. And people said, "Oh, I'm going to buy this book. I'm going to get it. This is interesting."
Get into this tweet chat.
Yeah, 8 to 9 on
social justice call.
I like that.
Yeah, so we're making an impression.
Okay. Well, I know B is an avid reader of all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, you run a bookstore, you're an avid reader.
Yeah.
So, what about this, B, which I know already, but folks who are listening don't know? Why are you doing this? Like, why are you supporting this?
Throughout the soon-to-be 30 years of the bookstore, it has always been important for me to have individuals like Susan and Lisa to utilize that space. We don't have a lot of places where we can actually, throughout the year, 365 days, bring our children in, let them have the visual. And that's something you have done.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched your children grow up. A lot of people say they like reading, um, um, avid readers. Oh, my child reads. But that's not necessarily, it doesn't always translate into people coming in because people do live very busy lives.
Mm-hmm.
You have a busy life, but
Mm-hmm.
you made a point throughout these. And I think you and I have known each other now a good 28, 20
Yeah,
yeah,
a long time.
years. And so, so this is important. There are other groups that have come in, and if they think of it as an incubator to start out, and then to go and do their thing. But what Lisa and Susan are doing, it helps to bring to the forefront that we have a place to utilize it and then to draw our community in. So,
So, Lisa, tell me, what is the most stunning thing about the miseducation of the Negro that made you think this is so relevant?
Well, it's talk about a page turner. This book is like, if we had a publication today that focused on Black education, it would be in that newspaper. What Carter G. Woodson began in 1933. Basically, he's talking about how the public school system obviously miseducates, but indoctrinates our community to be less interested in our own welfare and more educated about and interested in the welfare of other cultures, predominantly the white Anglo culture.
Wow, that is
And,
very timely.
So it's not as if people aren't going to find any relevancy in his works. But what he is known as at this point is that he's almost prophetic because it's 2017, and what he was writing about and lamenting in 1933 as something that had already been going on is still going on.
Still going on.
And so he says essentially, he uses these phrases, highly educated Negroes or educated Negroes have been educated out of usefulness to our community. They become,
Whoa,
yeah.
that's inflammatory. Like if you say that now,
Yeah.
people would want to fight you because that's.
Well, people say that now, and there's relevance to it. The system itself, from kindergarten through 12th grade, your basic grade school education, and we see this in the newspapers all the time. Textbooks are geared, obviously, dominantly to white culture, to European history. African history is something we've been pushing to move forward into the textbooks, into our curriculum, but it's not really there. And if it's not there, then it means that you are being miseducated out of self-knowledge, out of self-empowerment. Education, we believe, is about self-empowerment, self-liberation, self-definition, the ability to define yourself. And if you don't have that history, if you don't have that knowledge of yourself, Woodson said, how can you really be educated? You're really just mimicking someone else's culture.
That's pretty powerful.
That's very powerful. And not only that, you end up not being useful to yourself, but also not being useful to the other communities in this nation because you aren't using your own gifts. You're just mimicking someone else. You can only be second best to someone else. But
So reading that, do you make the leap that if you are mimicking somebody else's culture and educational systems, then you begin to not value or respect or align yourself with your own? Is that the
That's
right
exactly
leap?
right, and that is a definition of miseducation as far as Carter G. Woodson outlines in his book. He has the most intriguing chapter titles. The first title of chapter 1 is The Seat of the Trouble,
Mm-hmm.
and then How We Missed the Mark, how we drifted away from the truth. Yeah, he just puts it right out there. And in fact, his book, some people think his book is a history book. It is, in a sense, broadly of education, but it's really, he says in the preface, that he wrote this because he'd been giving talks about Black education for so many years, and people wanted a bound book. They wanted the document. They wanted his words to think about and continue, as he says, to apply in their own lives. And so he said, this book is really a compilation of 40 years of reflections on being in education, either as a student, and of course, he was the second Black person in the United States to receive a PhD from Harvard. So his reflections as a student, as a scholar, and then as an educator. So in his life was, I don't know, completely his biography, but he began as a coal miner in West Virginia.
Really? Now that I
Yeah.
didn't know.
And didn't enter school, I understand, until he was in his late teens,
Wow.
and accelerated to the degree that he received one of the highest degrees in the country, one of the earliest black men to do that. So he saw both ends of things. He saw what he would call sort of the masses, the uneducated masses, for whom he said, because they were ensconced in our own culture, because they were already aware of how to make a living either agriculturally or start businesses, they were more useful to our community than people who would go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, got educated in some other realm, and then would come back to the community and couldn't talk about Greek philosophers with anybody on the block because nobody else knew what they were talking about. And so that's how they become useless. It's not that their education, their information isn't valuable, but it's useless. It's useless if you want to come back and uplift the community.
Ah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah, and he talks about us just needing a functional education at some point. The question is, do we need that higher education? I would say yes, as a person that teaches in higher education, but we need a sound grounding in the basics, and then we can move on. But his return to school as an adult, means that anyone can do it. This is accessible to anyone. This is related to what we're doing in terms of community education and self-study.
Mm-hmm.
Carter G. Woodson could have just gone on to study independently. I mean, he went through the school system and got a PhD, but not everyone is going to do that. But you can get this information on your own, study on your own as an adult. It doesn't mean that you have to be, so academic or highfalutin or, study things that are hard to access, but anyone can pursue this, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to put that out into the community.
Well, I think that's a B. Dozier Taylor thing, because you're just that person, right?
Something, when I opened up in 1988, it was very interesting because so many of our African American males, whether they went off to college or if they were coming out of what I call the old hooskow, and but they knew about this book, The Miseducation of the Negro. They carried it in their pockets. They talked about how relevant it is, continues to be, how we missed the mark. Now, but what I saw is that when you understand this, then there are next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where I found we were lacking in
The
that
next
area.
steps.
Those next steps. Understanding how you missed the mark, but then it's like, the bullseye is still there. Let's just keep right on aiming.
Mm-hmm.
And so the aim gets, somehow, it veers off. And there's that piece that comes in there, where now you have information. This is what I found. It's like you have information, and now you want to lord over your community. Even today, people point at young people and talk about what they don't know. Well, they can't know what we don't teach. We're not making things available to them. So, yeah, this continues to be. The first time I read Miseducation of the Negro, initially I had a problem with just that term Negro. But
that was the language of the day, right?
Now, and interesting, yes, but in here, this is 1933, but they were discussing then about calling ourselves Black, the name change. So nothing is new. We just don't take that, we don't value individuals like Carter G. Woodson. He's the father of Black history. But what does that mean other than pulling together a few quotes during Black History Month, and acknowledging Black inventions? But it really gets limited because this has to be foundational. There's something that's missing in us. We keep missing the mark. But there seems to be some kind of enjoyment in talking about what should be. And should is a word that everybody knows what should be. But it doesn't take into account the reality of what is.
So, so should we be pressing Board of Education to be much more inclusive of our history and our story? Whose responsibility is it to blanket our community with our history and our stories?
It's everyone's responsibility, and yes, we should be pushing boards of education to do that, to have a more inclusive curriculum, to make the curriculum more diverse for everyone, really. I mean, not only our culture, but a curriculum that reflects the community in which it's taught. And Lisa can probably speak to some of the battles with textbooks in public schools to do that. But even if there's an African American history class that your students are taking in schools, we still need this education in our homes to show students how it's important and how it's relevant. We can't just say, okay, well, the public schools are going to, do Black History Month or African American history. My, student has taken a course. How are we going to show that child, that young person, that these things are relevant and important? We have to show it through application. We have to show them through our own study and reading. And again, it doesn't have to be heavy-handed. We're not saying you have to read Miseducation of the Negro and write an essay and be published. But
I'm saying you have to do that.
It would be nice. But let's just be versed.
We have differences. Our goals are different.
Let's just be versed in our history.
Send me your essays.
Well,
sorry,
little
sorry,
steps at a
sister.
time, Yeah, that would be great.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that would be great. But if we can just be versed in our history and maybe just choose one person. One thing I've really enjoyed about reconnecting about Woodson is all the historical references in the book. So there are many names and things that he drops, and we actually have a list on our website, booktalksisters.com, of a lot of the names and links to their history. And once you start researching and linking up all the names, then the whole picture becomes clearer. You just have a broad idea of what the history is just through that one book. So that's the kind of study that maybe you're not going to get in school. But take your time, move through the book, and do your own kind of research in your own kind of pace, and that's the benefit of it, I think.
Wow.
And something that is missing, I'm sorry, Vic, just one point, something that is missing in our schools is the intergenerational exchange. We try to promote our reading group intergenerationally. We want young people, we want our elders, we want a whole mix of people, because we all bring something to it. We are ourselves a text. And so when you get all those different mixes of people in the room, you not only have the book you're studying, but you have the text of people's lives that they can contribute. And that you won't get in the public schools. That's why it's so important to do collective, what we call collective study, but it's really just sharing with each other what our knowledge is. Each one teach one.
I like that. I like that. So how should we be thinking about how do we check our anger and still be able to intellectually gather and sit and be in this? Because I suspect you could get mad quick, fast, in a hurry.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know what? I think Woodson really was trying to tell people you do have to separate intellectual and emotion. But his idea, he said, was to awaken people to what the situation was, the current situation. And so essentially he was telling people, stay woke. Stay woke. Be about business right now. See what the situation is and deal with it. Yeah, you're going to be angry. If you really are learning something, you are going to be angry. And you'll be motivated to change things. He was not only just pragmatic in getting knowledge, but he was saying also be activist and change the situation.
But you don't want to, I mean, I know you're not saying this, but you don't want to totally dismiss emotional responses, because that's what, our mental health challenge is coming. We're not crazy in thinking about, you're being followed around the store, or that there's prejudice and so on. We have to acknowledge that. And that's also maybe the power of gathering together in a group and discussing these things. Real life experiences come out in our discussions, and that helps us to validate our experience.
And the thing is, we say angry. Now, I think underneath everything that's in me, there's probably anger. But then, what is it that you do with it? What am I angry about? And so the next step in the bookstore really is it's about that. I think there is that wanting to know more, um, wanting to put pieces back in place, creating opportunities in our neighborhoods so that our children are seeing something other than barbershops, beauty parlor, liquor stores, funeral home, church ministries, nightclubs, sneaker stores, nail salons. I mean, and fast food restaurants and mobile places.
Wow.
Now, now,
That's the whole city.
now, and where the bookstore is, that was a liquor store.
Mm-hmm.
There was a liquor store just 2 blocks over when I went to True, and I'm 66 now. So we don't offer our children much, and so anger. When you identify what your anger is, and then channel it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're not channeling it, then we're using our anger not to do anything. It's just good enough to be angry.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
And you can stroke that thing, because sometimes when I'm angry and I really have to pray, because I'm not ready to give it up, because it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really kind of look at, okay, what is my next step? And that's where one of the ways we miss the mark.
The next step. Taking the next step, or thinking about what the next step ought to be. So do you think, did Carter G. Woodson offer, I haven't read the Miseducation of Negro in 20 years. It's been 20 years since college.
Yeah.
So, that's 30 years, honestly. We tell the truth, 30 years. So did Carter G. Woodson offer us any insight into how to stay woke and then move forward in our awakened place?
Well, essentially he said critique all the information that you encounter. What I'm saying and anyone else that is, he was saying himself, critique my work or anyone's, and determine what is best for you. Let's look at our community in terms of what is important for us to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then begin to implement that, whether it's through the system.
That's challenging. That is challenging, Lisa, to sort of inventory our community, because you will hear people say whatever, education and housing and mental health, and I mean we have so much, not just a plate, a platter of things that require our immediate attention 24/7, right? Young people, mental health, housing, drugs, homelessness, chronic, whatever. I mean, there's a platters of issues. So,
and it's true, and I think if we could reduce it to one or two principles he really champions. One is self-care, not only individually but as a community.
We don't talk about self-care.
What do we need? We need assistance. We need practical things. We need schools. We need health care professionals. We need lawyers. We need the basic things to be a sort of community, a whole community within the larger nation. And so he would say about even businesses, probably we don't need liquor stores in every corner, but he did champion entrepreneurship, Black entrepreneurship. And this is his thing about education. Yes, go learn liberal arts, religion, history, philosophy, but open a store that can serve your community. You send Black folks to school to be doctors and lawyers. Well, support them. He says our problem is we look at Black professionals and say, they're only half as good as the white. Let's go to the white. How are you going to progress if you don't support the people who get the education you need? And how will you progress if you don't, as entrepreneurs, build a base, an economic base that you can then build on for your children? He said, foreigners come to this country, Blacks get very caught up in liberal arts education, in the philosophies and those kind of things, and forget the small things like a grocery store. So foreigners come to this country and study Blacks, not philosophy, and learn how to make money and grow rich. Because we aren't even producing the business owners who need to supply our needs. So he did cut it, he cut close to the bone on everything. He didn't pull any punches, because he said he himself made those kind of errors, judging people. He's not kind to preachers necessarily, politicians. Everyone gets a fair shot at his critique, but he's not wrong either. And it's not that we aren't doing anything, but he always says we can do so much better. In fact, given our given the economic, socio-political, and economic conditions in this country for blacks, we must do that. There's no reason not to. We're not. He just basically says we're just not using common sense.
Wow. If you just tuned in, I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. This is LoveBabz, LoveTalk on 103.5 FM, WNHH. We're live streaming on the New Haven Independent. You can check us out on live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. So I'm here today in the studio with women that I really, really like. And we are talking about the BlackTalkSisters.com BookTalkSisters.com group. And they've been having this series of conversations around particular books that sort of uplift and give us an intellectual place to ponder and discern and contemplate Black people in our community. So I'm here with Susan Monroe, Lisa Monroe, and B. Doja Taylor, my mentor and friend. So we're hanging out talking about, right now, Carter G. Woodson, the miseducation of the Negro. So who is carrying the torch of Carter G. Woodson right now? I know you have Hakai Mahabuti's book in front of you, Who is My Love? He is my love. Between him and Randall Robinson,
Okay.
they are my loves.
Now, before, if I can, I want to say with, Carter G. Woodson, even with just average everyday folk, he speaks of a woman, if I'm correct, she got on the bus. But what he noted, the African American female, but the way she carried herself, the way she was dressed, that she caused eyes to turn and look at her, Black as well as whites. But he was saying, we have to take care, when we say take care of ourselves, not dressing for style and show, but there was something that the people around her were seeing beyond this being a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
But she was interesting. There was an elevation, even for him, and I think he said she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He speaks of an entrepreneur, a Black, if I'm a seamstress, a tailor. But one of the things that she would talk to Black women and tell them, these are the colors that suit us. Just because we're used to getting hand-me-downs and, but you just want to take colors, not just because it came from Miss So-and-so, white ladies hand-me-downs, but you want to know that color that you have is so beautiful. And he speaks of how, yes, we can go to Europe and our color and our look and everything about us is sheer beauty. And this is something that is lost on us just in our everyday lives.
Yes.
So he covers the gamut. And who's carrying his torch? I'm going to say individuals. I'm carrying it.
Yes, you are.
And because so much of this is foundational, and to say, father of Black history, and then not to know what he was thinking, and thinking back in 1933.
Yeah, that's what I find.
And he was born in
Unbelievable.
1875. 1875. So when my mother was born, he was 25 years old. I look and it's wow, things have not changed. The challenges before us. There's too many individuals in education that have read Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro, and it's just laid there. And that's the ultimate shame.
Yeah, I would agree. So, are we losing intellectual ground around our culture and what we? I mean, are we seeing? Are we growing big thinkers? Are we growing? Are we cultivating intellectual thought? Like, where are we?
I think we're definitely cultivating intellectual thought. The number of scholars, the energy in Black Studies programs, we certainly are doing that, and that's a blessing. That 30, 40 years ago, those programs did not exist in higher education. So our persistence, our momentum has picked up some of these programs now are celebrating their 30th and 40th year. They're turning out scholars all the time. That is happening. I think what Woodson wanted to see was both factions, let's say, the educated class and the less educated class, work more cooperatively with one another. They both need one another. And to see in particular the educated class give back to and be among those who are not as educated to help lift them up in any way or apply their particular expertise to enterprise or community civic events or momentum so that we are sharing, so that there's something that is being recultivated in the community.
That's pretty interesting. So now why do you have Black Men Obsolete Dangerous,
well, you know,
Single Dangerous? And
yes, Black Men Obsolete Single Dangerous is a book of essays, poems, a sort of compilation of Haki Madhubuti.
yeah, that's my love.
Yeah. He began as a poet, and some people may know him
Third
in the
World
60s,
Press, yes.
as Don L. Lee, but he changed his name, began with a group of poets in Chicago to develop Third World Press, as you say, an independent publisher, which is still going on
Still
today.
going.
And
I stay on top of them.
Early 70s, something like that. So they've been around quite a while. But this book came out, I believe it came out in '93, and it was an amazing reaction. Susan and I are from Baltimore, and he visited Baltimore talking about the book. It sold over 1 million copies, which I think was the first time any Black independent
Oh, I
publisher
see that. I
sold
did not
that.
know.
Yeah, it really was well received, and it hit the mark. Let's say, to reiterate Woodson. But in particular, there's one essay in this book called "Never Without a Book," which Haki talks about how he began to read. And he was a young man doing the doo-wop and all that kind of thing, and as a young man, and went to Chicago, started traveling around with a group of young people selling Jet and Ebony, trying to make some money. They were interested in college. I think they were doing it as a summer program. He said, "Oh, I never thought about education for a young Black man even being possible." They were talking about getting back to the university. He thought, "Oh, that's interesting." He didn't do that, but he went into the Army. And essentially he said, you know, the Army was about hurry up and wait. So all day you have nothing to do, essentially. He started his own self-education program. He'd read a book a day and write, and this is why I said I want the essays. He would read a book a day and write a page and a half review of that book. And he said it changed his life. You know, he was introduced to Malcolm and Richard Wright and St. Clair Drake, historians and novelists, James Baldwin, all kinds of people he was reading. And he said, I began to understand the importance of self-knowledge. I had no idea, and he had gone through a public education system, no idea this vast amount of knowledge about our history, our African history, was there. And what I also like about what he does in this essay, it's very short, very easy, accessible. He talks about the pleasure of education. And we talk about that in our book. He said education was like the people. It was just, it became as important to him as lovemaking. And so that's pretty deep for a 19-year-old young man to say about reading. And so, and then he includes a list of sort of recommended books at the end of the essay. But I teach that essay, and I know Sue does in her class as well. And students just drink it up because they have not heard people their age, or at least he's writing at the time at an age where they are contemporaries with him, talk about the importance and the impact. His own personal reading group, it wasn't forced upon him. He couldn't stop. He said, when I got to one of his Fort camp, I forgot what camp it was, the sergeant who met them, the drill sergeant, saw the book in his hand. I think it might have been Malcolm X's autobiography. And he took it from him and held it up to everyone and said, this is not, you know, this isn't going to get you anywhere. And he tore the pages out of it right in front of him. And said that just, you know, deepened, made him double down on the importance. That showed him just how important it was because his drill sergeant wanted to let him know, a white man, wanted to let him know it was not important to know his history.
So are you ever amazed when you have a new crop of students coming in and how they just drink this up? Like, are you amazed that, oh my God, they're coming without any real knowledge of this stuff?
Oh, definitely. I mean, something like even the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. One thing that follows the essay in Haki Madhubuti's book is a list of books that he feels that every Black person should read. So that's touching on this idea of cultural literacy. And I talk about cultural literacy in my class, and you know, sometimes I'll just throw a date up on the board, 1776, and a lot of students can't apply any importance to that date. And so
Really?
Really.
In college?
They don't know. 1865.
College?
1776. They haven't been taught it, or if they were, they memorized it and, you know, just easily forgot. and maybe it's not that important to know exact dates, but some things are just in
It's
our background.
1776 though.
I've stood in front of a classroom and asked, and gotten no response. And maybe once I say, or give them a few hints, they go, oh well, of course. But the idea of cultural literacy becomes very important. I think I'm forgetting your question, but
When you are you surprised when when a new crop of students come in
right.
and they don't have any awareness?
Exactly. So once the idea of maybe a timeline of history, or questioning them or asking them, what is it that you know, or what is important? What do you think is important to know? They do begin to see sometimes a deficit and say, well, how can I learn this? How can I learn that? When are we going to study this? Can we cover that? So yeah, they once they realize that maybe they have a deficit, then they definitely want to fill in the gaps. And once you have that kind of hunger or interest, then that's half the battle, because you will go on, whether or not you take a African American history course in college or not, you're going to go on and do some reading on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So we can fill in little tidbits, but again, it comes back to the individual, what we were all saying: individual study for self-empowerment, self-determination, and eventually advocacy. And I ask students a lot of times as well, what is it that you want your children to know? Some of them are parents. What do you want them to know? What would you have wanted to know in order to be more empowered, to be more certain of yourself, to have a better sense of history? Where are the questions that you have? And that helps them also determine what it is they want to study.
So what do y'all think of these new films that sort of bring us closer to the story of slaves or enslaved people? We've had 12 Years a Slave, we've had, I don't know, whatever.
Well, unfortunately now they're
the
talking
Django,
about Confederate,
Django, and now the Confederate.
Which is really kind of dangerous. I think they're great in terms of, a lot of people want to learn visually. A lot of people, maybe don't want to go so deep into real issues, and these are kind of sweeping tales that touch on a lot of things. But there's still a danger of the story being taken from us in terms of the narrative being turned into.
Well, you see all the backlash with the Confederate.
Yes, I don't get that.
And let me tell you the local connection.
Oh.
So the two writers,
Uh-huh.
is Reverend Edmonds' children are connected to Reverend Edmonds. Like Kaji Spellman is Reverend Edmonds' granddaughter.
Jeez.
And her brother is one of the writers, and his wife is one of the writers of this story.
Mm-hmm.
They're black people.
Well, is it the book Underground? Underground Railroad was
The show Underground?
Yeah, Colson Whitehead. Underground.
The Underground Railroad.
Underground. I mean, that's kind of a scientific or futuristic take on the Underground Railroad experience. That's one thing, and it was literary, well thought out. They're taking a science fiction take on it, as I understand.
Yeah.
I don't really want to see our history toyed with until we have it down factually what actually happened.
Well, I always think of it as white folks' fantasy to sort of say the Confederacy went the other way and that slavery still prevails into this new millennium. I don't know how that's going to go well for us. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I mean? Like, that is never going to go well for us if that's the prevailing thought.
The movies such as 12 Years a Slave, what was it?
Now, I haven't seen 12 Years. I'm for these stories being told. I just haven't had the wherewithal to watch it.
Now, and that happens. We go in, and typically we say that we're looking at our history. This is to show us our history. The point I always make: no, I'm not looking at our history. I'm looking at theirs, because it's the same thing that happened during the civil rights movement, where all of a sudden white folk are comfortably sitting on their couches and they're looking at their television sets, and they're looking at, what are we doing? Here we are with hoses and dogs and beating old people and children. That was a pivotal point. They got a chance to see themselves. And so when I look at movies such as 12 Years a Slave, and it's like, no, I'm looking at your story, your behavior, the hatred the sheer hatred that brings you to a point that you don't care about children and old people. They don't want to see that. Um, and I can fast forward and say, and you don't want to see that these are your folk in them red states that you are depriving of, about to deprive uh, health benefits, health care. You know, that same mean spiritedness. We see it today. And so, no, it really, we have an opportunity to look at what they were like to us and how we braved ourselves in the midst of all of that. How many of us still, we would, in the midst of that kind of storm, we still, as a people, grow. Even though they say a flower doesn't grow in the storm, but but there are those flowers, the roots run, it causes the roots to run deeper, to hold on in the midst. And that's what I see in my community, like a flower in a storm, and the roots just grow deeper. And then there are a lot that just get blown away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Roots did it for me, so I don't really.
What, positive or negative? Positive or negative?
I think both. I think both. I mean, it was startling and stunning because you've never seen anything like it. So I think that was enough for me. So now I have a full sense of what that time could have perhaps was like. I don't need to keep seeing it over and over. I don't need the slave porn over and over and over again. I just don't. But I appreciate the stories, and I can read the stories. But I don't think I visually need to see, black people beaten, black women maligned and treated. I don't need that visual anymore.
But another generation might need to see it. For
Right.
example, Roots was remade recently.
Yes, and it was remade. I hadn't
today's
seen
generation.
the remake, but it's still, I'm just over it. But that's just me, and I get that stories need to be told and told and
Right,
told.
Now, what about Selma?
I saw Selma.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed Selma very much. I enjoyed it very much. I thought it was. I still like Malcolm X. I like Spike Lee's Malcolm X.
Oh, yeah.
I still find that to be a very visually powerful film.
I think it will be equally as powerful, or powerful at least, to see a contemporary film with black actors and actresses, just living their daily lives. Being contemplative, falling in love, working.
Yeah.
You still don't see the everyday black person on film.
Yeah.
So.
And I think Ava DuVernay has done a beautiful job of sort of working her way toward that. And I'm looking forward to that without it being a slapstick comedy. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to see us do the kinds of films that other people, like, I want to see us falling in love and falling out of love and getting back together, and those kinds of films that everybody else has privy to.
Without a riot going on in the background.
Without a riot or race or, nigger being bandied about or racist stuff. And I'm not saying that it's a fantasy. I'm just saying,
balance. We need balance.
We need some balance.
We haven't gotten balance.
It's like when we saw Boomerang, and people were like, even black people were like, that's not real. I was like, well, y'all ain't never been to Ebony or Essence or back in the day where you'd go to these places and it was just a sea of black people working, putting out these publications.
Well, I could never, I don't look at those movies as entertainment. When I go to see them, there's something I feel I have to pay tribute to.
Mm-hmm.
Those that did stand in the storm, and we are, we're what many of our Southern relations could only hope that one day their seed would be free. So I go there because there's something for me to understand, to continually understand. My daughter said to me, "Mom, can't you just let a movie be a movie?" No, but I don't go with the idea of being entertained. That is not in my mind.
Mm-hmm. But see,
there's
why
a lot
can't
that
we be entertained?
Because there's enough in our day-to-day lives where we are entertained. We're entertained on our jobs. We're entertained with the thought of, this new person coming into our lives and getting a new car. And we entertain ourselves in so many different ways. But we're talking about the legacy. We keep talking about future generations. I think we have to understand we do a lot more in the name of entertainment, and we undermine future generations because we expect them to know something that we didn't know and didn't put in place, didn't teach us to value. And I use these movies to remind me that these what we're up against, it's still there, and it's going to be there for my children. It's going to be there for my grandchildren.
Okay.
Well, I think if you are woke, then you have a certain mindset. You see the world critically, and sometimes it's hard to remove that consciousness and let a movie be a movie, because everyone now is not only tuned into entertainment for entertainment's sake, but the entertainment industry. I mean, we know how many Black people worked on this film, who's the writer, how big is the part for this actor, et cetera. Sometimes it's hard to divorce yourself of that mindset, as a critic in seeing a film. But we've used films, 13, for example. Last week we used a reference to 12 Years a Slave to help illustrate some of the things that we're talking about in miseducation or some of the other issues. And so it's been helpful, again, to help people have a visual to see. I mean, slavery isn't in any of our personal experience. So, the film, the visual does help us to create that context and make things, possible for us to imagine. It's not real, but we can imagine it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of also imagining it, making it real, was going on a tour as part of our previous reading group. We visited the Prince Hall Mason Lodge, which is the former site of the colored school for children here in New Haven, and visited their museum there that tells the story of that school being set up. And then we went on a mini walking tour over to Barrack and also to the former Hannah Gray home to talk about history here in New Haven. So that's another way to bring the visual into the experience and help people see that we're talking about something that is real. These are not just abstract ideas, but it's real. People have lived these things.
Wow.
And when and there at the Prince Mason Hall. Yeah. On the outside, that was a part of the Underground Railroad. So they have these large doors that they open up in the ground, these large plates. And just imagine that there were young children, there were adults that would come from where Varick is. And that might be maybe about 3 or 4 city blocks, that they were actually going underground and coming up right there. That does that takes a moment just taking that in. But a lot of people didn't know that existed there. There's a lot about our history we really take for granted. There is a place and there's a reason to value it.
Well, thank you, ladies, for being here today.
Thank you,
This
Babz,
has been a real pleasure and a quite illuminating experience. So the book group meets. It's going to be going on Saturdays from 2 to 3:30 at Black Print Bookstore on the corner of Edgewood and Day, my old address. So go. I invite everyone who hears this, and this will replay again this afternoon and sometime over the weekend. People should go and just be about listening and learning, and don't be intimidated. This is not intimidating stuff. They are inviting you to self-learn, and I think that is a big piece of building our own intellectual place in our community. So thank y'all for coming.
Thank you, Babz.
Susan, Lisa, and B. Doja Taylor. So I'm on my way out. I'll be back next week. Pundits is up at 11. I'll see y'all on the other side. Thank you.
As always, Babz.
See, it goes by fast.
It really does. That was
Goes by
wonderful.
fast.
Babz.